presentation.
Recording in progress.
Over to you, Charlie.
Hi, can everyone see my screen for starters? Yeah, cool. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Charlie, and I'm going to talk to you about my honours that I did in 2021 at the University of Adelaide and how that is merged into my PhD. And the title of it is The Australian Online Trade of Terrestrial Invertebrates. Now for a bit of background, wildlife trade is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it occurs on every inhabited continent on Earth, including Australia. So it involves both the legal and illegal trade of wildlife, and it's defined as the taking and exchanging of dead or living animal and plant specimens and products derived from them. So when most people think about wildlife trade, they might think of the rhino here for its horn, elephants for their ivory, or maybe even this little guy, the pangolin. However, it involves a huge range of plants and animals that a lot of people are unaware of, and this includes birds, a huge range of plants, reptiles, fish, and amphibians. And most importantly, to my research, and what a lot of people aren't aware of, is that it also includes terrestrial invertebrates. Now, you might better know these as bugs, and they are animals without a backbone that live the majority of their life on land. And this can be anything from butterflies and snails to ants, wasps, and spiders. Now, the trade of terrestrial invertebrates is hugely understudied, and because it's understudied, it's also underregulated. It poses lots of risks, but because it's understudied, these really haven't been evaluated. And so they have a range of biosecurity risks, including the introduction of alien invasive species and the introduction and spread of zoonotic diseases, which are diseases that can spread between animals to humans. It also poses conservation risks, including the unsustainable levels of wild harvesting of our native species. And invertebrates are data deficient as a whole, meaning that it's really hard to monitor their populations in general and identify risks that they are faced with. So there is a lot of knowledge gaps regarding the trade of terrestrial invertebrates, and my research was the first that has been done on it in Australia. So invertebrates are traded around the world for a huge range of reasons. Here's some of the most common ones. So food for human consumption, for pets, for silk production, and this is exclusively silkworms, for pollination services and the honey industry, and this is usually honeybees, preserved specimens for collection. So this is when people dry the invertebrates, put them in frames, they have them on their walls or museums display them. For biocontrol, so to control other pest species. For pet food, as you can see, this little bearded dragon here eating a cricket, and for fishing bait, which is most commonly earthworms. And my research focuses primarily on the trade of invertebrates for pets, as I found that this was the least regulated and involved the greatest diversity of species. So at the start, I collected all of my data online, and I did it from Gumtree and 23 Australian online pet stores. Now, as you probably all know, Gumtree is a public classifieds website in Australia where people post their own ads. They get to choose their own title, description, and price, and they use their own photos. And how I collected this was through something called an automated web scraper, which is a program that was developed by other people in my lab at the University of Adelaide. And what it does is it automatically goes through Gumtree on a weekly basis, and it flags all of the ads that it identifies as selling wildlife through searching for specific keywords. And all of these ads that it identifies as selling wildlife, it extracts all the data from them and puts them in spreadsheets. And so from Gumtree overall, over a 12-month period of collecting, I found 2,205 listings that were selling terrestrial invertebrates. And then I manually went to a bunch of online pet stores, 23 of them, selling terrestrial invertebrates in Australia, collected data from all the ads there, and found 701 listings. So all of these listings were then put into these huge spreadsheets. And then I had to clean the data, which was a huge task. It involved me going through all of these nearly 3,000 listings, reading the title, the description, looking at the images, and identifying what species was for sale. Because although some ads did, a lot of the ads didn't. They would be very general, so I'd have to try my best with some help from other entomologists to try and work out what exactly is being sold here. And then I added the other upstream taxonomy, such as their genus, family, order, etc. So I had all of that information for all of the invertebrates being sold, and then I was able to analyze it. So in total, from both Gumtree and the online pet stores, I had 2,906 listings selling terrestrial invertebrates. And from these, I was able to identify 264 different species. 145 of these were on Gumtree and 201 were sold in online pet stores. And all of these species came from 7 different invertebrate classes, which fall under the common descriptions of spiders and scorpions, centipedes, earthworms, millipedes, snails and slugs, insects, and isopods. And here on the right, I've got the 3 most popular species that were for sale. We have the spiny leaf stick insect, the Flinders Ranger scorpion, and the little silkworm. Now I created something called a species accumulation curve, and this is for the Gumtree data as it was collected over 12 months. And what it shows is the number of species identified as more listings are collected over time. So as you can see, as more listings are recorded over time, more species are identified, and this continues to grow. And it doesn't really reach a plateau, it just keeps getting higher and higher. And this implies to me that if more sampling was done, if I collected more data, and if I had more listings, I would just continue to identify more and more species. And this is where I began to realize that looking at the terrestrial invertebrate trade in Australia was a lot more than just a small honours project. I also looked at the provenance of the species sold, so their origin, and I found that 85% of all of the species sold were native to Australia and 34 were non-native. From these non-native species, 3 were invasive, and that is the Asian tramp snail, the African big-headed ant, and the white garden snail or the Mediterranean snail that you might have seen around South Australia. Now here's an example of the white garden snail or Theba passana. Now it's a really big issue in South Australia, but also in other states too. It costs the agricultural industry millions of dollars every year as they feed on crops, contaminate grain during harvest, and they clog and damage agricultural machinery. Now this snails is just an example. It's for sale on a website, 5 for $16.50. But as you can see, they are found very commonly in agricultural areas. You find them in huge clusters on farms, on fence posts. They can kill plants really quickly and they breed really rapidly. And currently, this is a current distribution map of them. They're mainly around the southern coast of Australia. Not really too many in Queensland, or not a huge amount in New South Wales either. However, this website here just openly sells them and will ship them anywhere in Australia with no regulations. So this means that a species like this could easily spread all around Australia at a much quicker rate than it is already. thanks to these websites. So there does need to be a lot more regulation on this kind of stuff. I also looked at the specific characteristics of some of the most popular species that were for sale to try and work out what was really driving this trade and what was most appealing for the people buying them. And surprisingly, I found that it's the dangerous aspects of invertebrates that the buyers seem to like. So on both Gumtree and online pet stores, over 70% of the most popular species have a painful bite, and over 80% aren't even recommended for handling, meaning that they're pretty much just buying them to be put in tanks and just have on display, I guess. And then overall, 4 species for sale are lethal to humans, and these are all spiders, but I guess people still want to have them as pets. And surprisingly, in online pet stores, the average price per unit, so per individual invertebrate, was almost double that of Gumtree at $63, and the average price on Gumtree was $32.23. So a lot of people have said that I'm crazy for doing this, but I enjoyed my honours so much that I've decided to do my PhD on it now. And I'm about 5 months in, and I'm just going to be expanding on everything I did in my honours, because I just realised there were so many knowledge gaps that I wasn't even able to fill in that year. So I hope to quantify the size of the invertebrate trade in Australia's domestic economy. So that species accumulation curve that I showed you earlier, I hope to finally eventually get that to reach a plateau, so collect as much data as possible. I want to determine the extent that international markets engage in the trade of Australian species. So looking at what Australian species are being seized at the borders of other countries, and also what species are being seized when people attempt to import them into Australia too. I want to identify the conservation threats to native species that's posed by this trade, and identify further biosecurity threats that's posed by the trade. So I'm going to be collecting a lot more data. I'll be going, I'll be getting data from Gumtree and online pet stores, but I will also be going to physical pet stores around Australia and going to some wildlife trade expos too, to record everything that I see for sale. I'll be using international data, so I'll be using seizure data. That's when packages or people's suitcases get intercepted at borders and they have invertebrates in them that we're trying to smuggle. So I'll be using data from a bunch of other countries to see what native species people are selling internationally, and then I'll also look at what people are trying to import and export from Australia in terms of terrestrial invertebrates. I will undergo much more in-depth risk assessments for both the conservation and biosecurity threats from this trade. And then in the end, I will be able to present my findings to the government and to policymakers to enable more effective policy decision-making. So that's it. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much for your support. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there tonight, but I'm really grateful that you asked me to present.
Great talk. Thank you, Charlie. Do we have any questions? Can you hear okay now?
Yep.
Via Zoom? Good, great. Any questions for Charlie? Peter?
In Charlie's results, what about the people who legally have permits to breed and trade, as opposed to those? Because there's hardly anything mentioned about, because I understand, for instance, there are some permits currently within the Department of Environment for research into, take the example, the spider, the peacock spider and the jumping spiders, to exchange specimens globally.
So you can get, there's a lot of research permits that you can get. But in terms of people owning them as pets and breeding them in their own house, in their backyard, I from what I'm aware, I don't think there is any kind of permit that you can get in Australia for breeding your own invertebrates. I think you can get certain permits for collecting them from the wild for some species. But I don't think there is even a permit for keeping invertebrates or breeding them yourself.
Thank you.
Hey, Charlie, I was just keen to understand on that, on those snails that basically go around and eat all our cereal. They're so common in the wrong places. Why would anyone want to buy them online and pay for them? And why would you want to own them? We're trying to get rid of them and people are trying to buy them.
I don't know. That's something I would really like to understand. I'm kind of just guessing maybe it's people from big cities that don't even realize that they are such a pest in agricultural areas. And I think people will just be buying them for pets, maybe for the young kids, because they're so easy to keep. And I guess they wouldn't realize that you could just drive out into the country and you can collect them off a fence post really easily.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good answer.
It's really strange.
Right. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Kerry, can I follow that up?
Yeah, question from Kerry.
So I understand. I have worked with white snails, with fever and the other one in the past. I understand that in Europe, people actually eat them. So fever in particular is commonly eaten. So maybe there are people actually buying them for food rather than as pets. That's one thing. The other thing that I would be very interested to know, I've often wondered, is just how much of a threat they are posing to the regeneration of our native plants, because, you know, they particularly like very young seedlings. So, for example, I've seen them over in Kangaroo Island, and I've been myself, what the heck's going on here? You know, they can be out in the bush in millions. What are they actually doing in terms of regeneration of our native species? I wonder if you'd like to make any comment on that.
Yeah, so firstly about eating them for food, I considered that too, because I did read somewhere that people can eat them, but this was on a website where they were just selling lots of other pet invertebrates too, and they were only selling, I think, 5, so it's probably not enough to really be consumed anyway. So I just assumed it's for pets because of the website that it was on, but yeah, you never really know. And then in terms of the damage to the native environment, I think from what I saw, a lot of research was into the effects it has on agriculture, and not much on native species. I'm not sure if that's because they have a preference for cereals and grains, or if that's just where the funding was for the research. I'm not really sure, but from what I saw, it looks like there isn't much research on their effect on native plants.
I've got a question for you. With the strict quarantine inspections by APHIS and the like, how are the exotic species actually getting into Australia? Are they being smuggled? And if so, do you have an estimation on the number of illegal interceptions?
So my honours didn't focus too much on the international side of it, people trying to smuggle them in and out. That's what I hope to look at for my PhD. But from just some news articles and things like that, it seems like it was more so people trying to smuggle them out of the country. That was more common than people trying to smuggle them in, because we have so many rare and cool invertebrates that sell for huge amounts of money in other countries. So that seemed to be a bigger issue. And it really was just people both posting them in and in their suitcases, hiding them in things like matchboxes and little film canisters and things like that, because they're so small. If you want to smuggle in a queen ant or something, I doubt it would be very hard to conceal it. Mm.
Yeah, and just another quick question. People who keep invertebrates as pets, they're obviously very conducive to having invertebrates or an appreciation of creepy crawlies and things. I wonder how many of those people transfer to careers in entomology or archaeology or conservation of invertebrates, or someone just said drug smuggling.
Yeah, I've wondered that too. I would really like to be able to hopefully hand out some kind of survey for my PhD to try and work out what kind of people own invertebrates. And I think it's tricky because I agree that owning invertebrates for pets, especially for kids, is really good, and it's educational because so many people think that invertebrates are just scary and gross, little creepy crawlies. So it's good to educate people on their importance and not be scared of them, but to somehow manage to do it in a sustainable way. So if we could manage to do it to just do it for native species and our ones that are really abundant, that would be good. But I think we just need a lot more education and regulation on it to make sure it's happening sustainably.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Peter has got a question.
Yeah, I wonder about the clash between commercial interests such as honeybees versus native bees, and how that's playing out. Native bees seem to be outcompeted by honeybees in a lot of places, and they don't belong in the honeybees don't belong in the wild, where native bees are doing all the pollinating and so on.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting one. The honey industry is so big and it brings Australia so much money. And yeah, I found a lot of honeybees just traded online. There's really no regulation on it. They're bringing in more now because of the varroa mite, which is a big issue or a big threat in Australia. But yeah, they definitely have, European honeybees definitely have a negative impact on native bees. And I'm pretty sure a lot of native bee populations are declining because of this and other things like habitat destruction. But yeah, it's a tricky one, and I'm going to be doing a big component of my PhD looking at the honeybee trade, because I know that it needs to still be occurring because the honey industry is so big, but there needs to be some kind of regulation and just keeping track of where they're being bred, where they're being sold to, because we don't want the varroa mite to be spreading all over Australia as well because of the invertebrate trade being under-regulated.
Thank you.
I wonder how popular bumblebees would be in the pet trade, because they're big and cute and fluffy. And do they appear in your list?
What animal is that, sorry?
Bumblebees, do they appear in your list of invertebrates? Because they look as though they would be very amenable.
They do. Yeah, I don't think they did. Surprisingly, I guess they wouldn't be the greatest pet, but they are really cute to look at.
Hard to keep culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions?
Not so much a question, but just to know, you talk about exporting invertebrates abroad. If you can arrange for all the Portuguese millipedes to be sent back to Portugal, I'll be a very happy man.
Okay, after my PhD, I'll do a project on that.
Thank you.
And you'd make a fortune on fence posts out in the Mallee.
You would. Plenty of them.
Mm.
Yep. Suzanne here has got a question.
Yeah, I'm just interested to know which bugs in particular are being sold for pet food. I mean, they're obviously reptiles that are kept as pets would eat bugs. So you know about that?
So for pet food, it was mainly, there were crickets, mealworms, they call them woodies, just like a small little native beetle. What else? I think they were the top three. Also some types of cockroaches. But from what it looked like, the pet food trade of invertebrates it doesn't seem to involve any wild harvesting. It's only a handful of species, and it's really regulated because they're usually sold in physical pet stores. So yeah, it's quite a regulated part of the trade that only has very few species.
Do you plan to visit any location where they're breeding those for pet food? It would just be interesting to see the quantities that are sold.
I haven't thought about that, but it would be really interesting. I know that there's there's a couple big companies that actually ship their invertebrate pet food all around Australia. So they probably own most of the market for it in Australia. It would be interesting to find out where they are and contact them. Yeah.
That would be another area that could possibly require regulating.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay. No more questions. Okay. Thank you again, Charlie, for the great talk. Congratulations also on the Alwin Clements Prize from 2022. And you're more than welcome to come out to any of our reserves when you get some chance between your working on your PhD thesis, and good luck with your research in the next few years. So I'd like everyone just to thank.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll